All right, a couple of announcements. One is the Praxis, which is the economics club, is having a party on Saturday, September 12th, which is like tomorrow, and at Hayden Park from 12 to 3. And they'll be serving food from Saucy Dogs up in Jonesville. There's, I guess, it's going to be bringing hot dogs and stuff. So anyway, you might want to just stop by there and maybe get introduced to other people that are in economics or in the economics club. So that's at Hayden Park at 12 to 3 tomorrow. The other thing is the classic album of the week this week is Rod Stewart's album. This is the Every Picture Tells a Story album. Okay, so we've been talking about that a lot. Anytime you draw a demand or supply curve, as you notice if you've looked at the old exam number ones, it'll say use demand and supply curves to help you explain, right? So you can't just draw the demand and supply curve. So you got to tell the story that goes with it. So this is the classic Every Picture Tells a Story. Maggie May's on here and a couple other good tunes. So you might want to take a look at that. And by the way, vinyl records just for the first time since 1986 sold more than CDs. Now part of that's because CD sales have been going down because most of the sales are through streaming, but I like to make the point that vinyl's on its way back. All right. So last time we were looking at shifting the demand and supply curves around. And again, when you look at the old exams, you'll see that there's always a 10-point question asking you to deal with such a situation. And we noted that if you shift the supply curve to the left and the price goes up, it's possible that people could spend more on it if the demand is inelastic in that relevant range, in the range in which the supply curve is moving about. But another point to make is that what happens if you shift both of the curves at the same time? So let's say I have a demand and supply for coffee, and let's say this is a coffee. And it turns out that people find out that drinking a cup of coffee a day improves your health, right? So we find that, if you drink a cup a day, your health improves. So what would that do? Well, that would change people's preferences for coffee and shift that demand curve to the right, and that people would be willing to buy more coffee at the same price that they did before. So your demand curve would shift to the right, right? So we'd have demand shifts right. But let's say also at the same time there is some sort of disease that affects the coffee plants, right? So there's a disease that destroys coffee plants. Well, that would shift the supply curve to the left, right? So because the price of inputs would have gone up and the price of the input going up, what would that do? That would shift that supply curve to the left. Okay? So now the question is, what happens to price and quantity? Well, one thing we know is the price had to go up, right? It would be impossible for this intersection, right? It'd be impossible for this intersection to be lower than that one. So if the demand curve shifting to the right and the supply curve shifting to the left, price had to go up. But we don't know what happened to Q. That would depend on whether the supply curve shifted more to the left than the demand curve shifted to the right, right? So where this Q shows up, it could be anywhere in there. So if both curves are shifting, in this particular instance, where they're both shifting they're shifting in opposite directions, one shifting to the right and one shifting to the left, then I can't tell what's going to happen to Q. I do know price is going to go up. Similarly, if I told you a story that said, I tell you the opposite story. I say that it turns out that drinking coffee is harmful to your health. Okay, and so the demand curve shifts to the left. And I told you the story that says, somebody figured out how to genetically modify coffee beans so that that's now lowers the price of coffee beans. So the price of inputs will have fallen. Then the supply curve shifts to the right. So if demand shifts left, and supply shifts right, well, then we know that the price has got to be intersecting lower, right? P had to go down. But I don't know what's going to happen to Q. So if both curves are shifting and one shift in one direction and one shift in the other, right, then I will know that either the price went up or the price went down, but I'm not going to know what's going to happen to Q. Similarly, if I shift them both to the right, if I tell you a story that says, oh, okay, the demand for vinyl records shifts to the right because people think that vinyl has records have a much a smoother sound than this digital sound that you're getting. So that the demand curve shifts to the right. And then it turns out that how the price of labor to make vinyl records went down, right? So there was something that happened, it turned out that in the vinyl record industry, you don't have to provide health insurance for your employees or something like that, right? So we would tell some story that's going to make the price of an input go down, or the technology of making vinyl records has changed, so it's easier to make vinyl records. By the way, cassette tapes also have been going up in sales, just as a FYI. So we tell a story that shifts the supply curve to the right. If the demand curve shifts right and the supply shifts right, then what we know is that Q goes up, right? We couldn't have an intersection. If they're both shifting to the right, I couldn't have an intersection which was to the left of our original Q here, right? So I had to have Q, but what happened to P? We don't know, right? I can't tell what's going to happen to price. Depends. If the supply curve shifted a lot and the demand curve shifted a little bit, then the price would go down, right? If the demand curve went a little bit and let's say if we did it so that the demand curve only shifted like this and the supply curve shifted a lot, right, then we'd end up with this intersection. What if the demand curve, the supply curve didn't shift very much, but the demand curve shifted a lot, right? So that the demand curve shifted way out here and the supply curve, then you'd have the price would go up. So I'm going to know that the connection's got to be, or the intersection's got to be to the right, but I don't know whether it's going to be up or down. And then similarly, I mean, obviously, when you think about it, you're going to have a similar situation where if I tell you a story that's going to shift both to the left, I do something, let's say, I tell you a story that this is a good that's inferior and incomes go up. Okay, that would shift the demand curve to the left. Let's say we start out here. And then I do something which shifts the supply curve to the left, right? Price of an input goes up. Then what would happen is I have to get an intersection going that way, right? We have to have Q goes down, but I don't know what's going to happen to P. Depends on which shifts more. So if I'm telling you a story that shifts both curves, you're only going to know what happens to one thing. So when you look at the old exams, you'll notice that there's usually a multiple choice question about that. And so you'll have to notice that you'll know that the price went up, but you didn't know what happened to Q. Okay? Yes.
So if demand shifts more than the supply, and they're both shifting the same direction, you will not know whether one value goes up or down, or
if the demand and supply are shifting to the right, okay, I will know what happens to Q, but if what I did, the question is what will happen to price? Suppose I have the demand curve that looks like that and a supply curve that looks like that, right? And I shift the demand curve a lot, and I shift the supply curve a little bit. Okay? Then what's going to happen? The price is going to go up. But what if I did it where I shifted the demand curve What would happen if I started here with demand and supply, and then what I did was I shifted the demand curve just a little bit, and I shifted the supply curve a lot, right? Then the price would go down. So it just depends. When it's both are shifting, it will depend on which is shifting more to tell you what happened with the price, if they're both shifting to the right or they're both shifting to the left, or what will happen to Q if they're shifting in opposite directions. Then I won't know what's going to happen on the Q side, but I know what's going to happen on the P side. If they're both shifting, again, if I have some story that says here's demand, here's supply, and I do something which makes the demand curve go this direction and the supply curve go that direction, I got to have price go up, right? So the point is that you're only going to, when they're both shifting, when both curves are shifting at the same time, I'm either going to know what happened to price or I know what happened to quantity, depending on how they shifted. But yeah, you have a...
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm assuming it's because we just won't be told which shifts more than the other.
Pardon? A little bit louder?
Are we just not going to be told which curve shifted more than the other? That's why we wouldn't know what happened.
Right. I'm not on the exam. If you look at the old exams, I'm going to give you a story that tells you something, and you're going to have to notice that the demand curve shifted one direction and the supply curve shifted the other direction, or notice that they both shifted in the same direction. And then the answer is going to be, we know that quantity went up, but we don't know what happened to price. I'm not going to tell you which did more. If I told you which did more, then you might know. Okay? But I don't. Right. The point that the point of the question is to make sure that you understand that you won't know what happens to one thing simply knowing which direction that the curves shifted if you have two of them. Another interesting point is I took a leave from Hillsdale College after the '94 congressional elections and to be Congressman Nick Smith's chief of staff. So I took a leave, went out there. And during that period, there was an increase in the minimum wage that passed. And of course, as you can imagine, Congressman Smith did not vote for the increase in the minimum wage. But as his chief of staff, I would have lobbyists that would come in and try to convince me that I should convince the congressman to vote this way or the other way. And what I did was I had lobbyists from several of the labor unions came in and was trying to convince me that Congressman Smith should vote for the minimum wage. Now, none of their members made less than that minimum wage, okay? They all made more. So the question was, why in the world is this labor union spending money to have a lobbyist come in and try to convince Congressman Smith, or for me to convince Congressman Smith to vote for this increase in the minimum wage when none of their members are going to be affected by it? And you know, they might say, well, gee, we want to have the waitress at you know, some restaurant in Addison, you know, it's nice for that waitress to get more money, or nice for that waiter to get more money, or something like that, right? But there's an old expression that my dad used to say. It's a little bit R-rated, so if you don't want to hear it, you can close your ears. But he said, just don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. Okay? It ain't raining. That's not why they're in there, to get the minimum wage increased. If you sort of thought about it a little bit, you'd go, oh, well, gee, what if I could divide the labor force into low-skill labor and high-skill labor? And I got a demand for low-skill labor, and I got a supply of low-skill labor, and I got a wage here, and I got number of people hired here, and here's the equilibrium wage. And then I got the same thing over here. Demand and supply for high-skill labor. So I got a wage, and I got the number of people hired here, and we're at some equilibrium. Well, what does that mean? I could produce something using a lot of machinery and high-skilled people to operate that machinery, or I could do it by having a bunch of you do it by hand, not very high-skilled, so you're low-skilled, and I could produce it either way, right? Well, notice that if they're substitutes for one another, what is the minimum wage going to do? It's going to increase the price of a substitute, right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to increase the price of low-skill labor, because low-skill labor and high-skill labor are substitutes for one another. And we know that if I increase the price of a substitute, all right? So if I increase the price of a substitute, what does that do? It shifts the demand to the right. So if what I did was I increased the price of low-skilled labor, and you could either produce things with high-skilled labor and a machinery, or low-skilled labor and not so much machinery, what's going to happen? I'm going to shift that demand curve off to the right. And I'm going to raise the price of high-skilled labor, and we'll get more high-skilled labor being employed. So I sat down with the lobbyist, and I did a Rod Stewart, and I drew the demand and supply. I did this very thing for them and said, this is why you're in here asking for that, right? And they left not thinking that Congressman Smith was going to vote for the increase in the minimum wage. So, all right. That leads us to the next topic, which is profit, right? And profit is total revenue minus total cost. Right? So if I look at what's the total revenue from selling hot dogs, what's the total cost of selling the hot dogs, then if the total revenue is bigger than the total cost, then that's profit. And that is what we call accounting profit. And we're going to use pi, just as we used epsilon to be the symbol for elasticity, we're going to use pi to be the symbol for profit. Okay? Now, For an economist, economists talk about economic profit. And economic profit includes all the opportunity costs. Again, if you own the Hillsdale Brewing Company, and let's say at the end of the year, your accountant shows that the total revenue was $100,000 and the total costs were $40,000, you'd say, oh, wow. The accountant would say, okay, you had $60,000 in profit. However, if the owner of the Hillsdale Brewing Company could have earned $70,000 as the manager of the Burger King, okay, negative economic profit. Because when you include the opportunity cost of her time, then what's going to happen? Now the total revenue is going to be less than the total cost. So we're going to talk about this in a minute, and when you hear an Econ 202, they're going to say competitive firms make zero profit. And you go, well, why in the world are they in business if they're making zero profit? It's because they really mean they're making zero economic profit, and we'll explain why that would happen. But making zero economic profit doesn't mean you're not making total revenue minus total cost be zero. It's that when you include all the opportunity costs, then what's happening? It says that you're making as much with those resources as you could have somewhere else. If you were making positive economic profit, you'd be making more with those resources than you could have somewhere else. If you're making less with those resources than they could have been somewhere else, then you're going to make negative economic profit. Okay? So, and again, we'll talk about this in a moment, but basically the point is that economic profit includes all the opportunity costs that are involved in whatever you're having to be doing. Now, profit is a signal, right? When we have, Joe Biden's running for president, and one of the things in Joe Biden's platform is to increase the tax on profits. Okay, and we'll talk in a moment about maybe you want to do that. Fine, but let's think about what's going to happen when you do that. Right? So, what is a profit a signal about? It says that you are using resources to please consumers in an efficient manner. And we've already talked about this. We said the logic of how markets work is that you have to pay resources their opportunity costs. All the resources you got, you had to pay their opportunity cost. And then you had to make something of greater value. That is, your revenue has to be greater than those opportunity costs, or what happens? You go out of business, right? So we said logically that's what happens. So what is profit then? Profit is a signal that says you're using resources in a manner that pleases consumers. So for example, suppose that we find that Google had a profit of $1 billion. Okay? So Google's got this profit of $1 billion. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that Google took resources worth X, if that's their economic profit. Okay? So if Google's economic profit were $1 billion, then what it would say is Google took resources that are worth X and produced something that you guys value at X plus 100 billion. Right? If Google's costs were X, X dollars, what happened? What happened was that they produced a value of 1 billion plus X. We want companies to make lots and lots, right? We want companies to earn economic profit. What is economic profit about? It's saying, hey, I made more with those resources than their next best alternative. And how did I make money with those resources? A system of voluntary exchange, they must have sold you something that you valued enough to have them earn economic profit. So if firms are making profit, that's a positive, right? That's not a negative. We want to say, oh my gosh, Google made $1 billion last year. That's just terrible, right? They made $1 billion in profit. That's just terrible. Why would that be terrible, right? It says that you guys valued the services of Google by $1 billion more than the opportunity cost of the resources that went into it. But yeah, did you have a...
Yeah, I was going to ask if there's a way to discern between firms that get their profit from adding value versus firms that are getting profit from kickbacks from the government.
Well, if the government is out there, the question is, you know, what if the government's giving them the money? Yeah, you could do that, right? But that's not how the market system, the market system is not about big business gets together with big government and then they transfer resources around, right? That's not what market capitalism about. Market capitalism about is this system of voluntary exchange. It doesn't say, we're going to take away your income and then we're going to give it to somebody else, right? And they get rich because we took your stuff away and gave it to somebody else. That's not how capitalism works, right? Capitalism works is the only way that you get stuff is if you please other people. You get them to voluntarily give stuff up. In fact, I just looked at the founders of Google. One's worth $64 billion and the other's worth $62 billion. Okay? So guess what? More people have used Google than have ever listened to me talk. Guarantee it. Right? So if we found out that more people had watched my videos and paid to listen to me, paid my speaking fees, if enough people had paid my speaking fees to match what Google did, then I'd be a billionaire, right? But I don't think that's just going to happen. So I've sort of given up my hopes of being a billionaire. Anyway, so we want firms to make a profit. Like I said, it's a signal that this firm is producing more in value to consumers than the opportunity cost of those resources. Notice that what will happen is that in markets, we're going to move resources around in order to respond to consumer demand. Why is that? Suppose that a firm is making economic profit, right? So a firm is making economic profit. What does that mean? It's earning more with those resources than doing anything else, right? Because I'm paying them their opportunity cost. I'm paying them their value, the next best alternative, okay? So suppose that's going on. Other firms are going to figure this out, right? And what are they going to do? They're going to enter the industry, right? What's going on? Profit is going to attract new firms. Right? Profit's going to attract new firms. I'm over here and I say, oh my gosh, they're making economic profit, making Coney dogs. Okay, and I'm looking around. Oh my gosh, the Coney dog's making $100 million a year. Guess what? I'm going to say, you know what? Maybe I should start making coney dogs, right? Because I'm earning more in the coney dog industry than, they're earning more in the coney dog industry right now than the opportunity cost of the resources. So what's going to happen? We're going to attract new firms. So whenever there's a firm making economic profit, guess what? Other firms are going to enter. So when other firms enter, if we think back to what we were just talking about, notice that the supply, the market supply, is the sum of the individual firms. Okay? So the market supply will increase. Right? So if I've got P and Q, here's where we started out with demand and supply. And now what happens is the firms that are making coney dogs, right, they're earning economic profit. What am I going to do? I'm going to start making coney dogs. And I'm going to enter that industry. And what's going to happen? Supply is going to shift to the right. Right? So the supply shifts right. Price is going to go down and quantity is going to go up. And notice what's going to happen to profit. Profit will go down, right? Profit will be getting smaller. The price is getting smaller per unit, right? So firms are going to be entering the industry, right? And they'll keep entering until economic profit goes to zero, right? Once economic profit is zero, then there's no reason to keep entering, right? So they'll enter until economic profit equals zero. Okay? So profit then acts as a signal to come enter this industry, right? My firm is earning millions of dollars in economic profit, which is saying that the total revenue I'm getting is greater than the opportunity cost of the resources. Enter the industry. And so what will happen is firms will enter. And so now you have Kellogg's and Post and other things, all sorts of different manufacturers of things. They'll keep entering that industry until you drive economic profit to zero. Now, suppose you just have the opposite, right? Suppose what happens is economic profit is less than zero. Well, good firms are going to exit. So suppose we started out with some story and what we've got is vinyl records. Okay? And here's the price and quantity of vinyl records. And then what happens is there's the invention of the compact disc. And I remember when I bought a compact disc player when it was first came out, right? Bought this compact disc player, and the person at, I forget where it was, Best Buy or something, said, well, you're probably not going to buy another vinyl album. You're just going to buy compact discs, okay? Which was moderately true. But so what happens is that the companies that are making vinyl records, what's happened? The demand curve for vinyl records has shifted to the left, right? So suppose that the demand for vinyl shifts left, okay? Well, then what's going to happen? Price is going to fall and quantity is going to fall. And now profit's going to be less than zero. If they were making zero economic profit to start with, right? If they were making zero economic profit to start with, they were in equilibrium. Then what's going to happen is they're going to earn negative economic profit, and so some firms are going to leave, right? The total revenue that they're getting is not equal to their opportunity cost. So what will happen is firms exit. So then what happens is when firms exit, you get just the opposite, right? Supply shifts left. right? And when supply is going to shift left, then what are we going to get? We're going to get the demand curve shifted to the left, and now the supply curve shifted to the left. So we know that Q is going to fall, and P is going to have gone from there to there to there, right? So if we go 1, 2, 3. So as the supply curve shifting to the left, the price is going up. So it's possible that it gets back, economic profit gets back to 0, right? And in fact, that is what happened in the vinyl record industry. There were, I think there's one company left that actually made the vinyl records. And same thing happened in the cassette industry. There was one company that stayed in business making cassettes. There was enough, the demand for cassettes was sufficient that they, even when it had shifted to the left, there was the supply curve shifted to the left enough that economic profit got back to 0. So in vinyl and cassettes, what happened is there was one firm left and stayed in business. So what happened was economic profit was equal to 0 again. So firms are going to keep exiting as long as economic profit's negative. As they exit, the supply curve is going to shift. As the supply curve shifts to the left, the price is going to go up, and eventually the price will get up to economic profit being 0. But maybe not, right? It might be that it never gets back to 0. It may be that Beanie Babies don't get produced anymore, right? Beanie Babies and competitive Beanie Babies. Anybody got Beanie Babies? Right? There's one or two. Yeah, you don't want to be a. Yes, I still have a Beanie Baby. But you must have got Beanie Babies when you were a kid, right? And now you don't go to Walmart and there's a bunch of Beanie Babies out there and competitors to Beanie Babies, right? So it's possible that the demand curve the demand curve shifts to the left so much that you never get to where you're, when you're buying it again, right? Rotary dial phones, okay? I have one on my desk in my office, if any of you come on in. I have a black rotary dial telephone, right, sitting there, just so people know this is what it used to look like. Flip phones. Right? Possible. Some of you might have a flip phone, but my guess is you probably don't. And so what happened? You know, the demand shifted to the left enough that firms exited that flip phone industry. Okay? So, but the point is that profit is there for a reason in a market economy. In a market economy, what the profit's there to do is to get you to know that, hey, somebody's earning more with their resources than the opportunity cost, we should enter that one. Or it's saying, hey, we're making less than the opportunity cost of resources, we should get out of that. We should get out of that industry. So profit acts as the signal. Second thing profit does, it's an incentive to innovate. Why is it that I'm going to, notice, innovation requires risk, right? It's not innovative if you're doing something that everybody knows how to do. It's innovative if you're doing something that nobody really knows how to do it yet, right? And there's lots and lots of people that are innovating and they lose money on it, right? There's a few people that innovate and they make lots and lots of money. Bill Gates, for example, right? Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, neither of them finished college, right? They dropped out of college. Why did they drop out of college? They were taking on a risk that their product that they were making, Apple, Steve Jobs was making a guess that Apple was going to, that thing was going to make it, right? It wasn't guaranteed that was going to happen, but took on that risk. Why take on that risk? Want to be a billionaire, right? There's an incentive to earn economic profit. And so innovation is a key to taking on the risk of innovation. Again, Bill Gates, same thing, dropped out of school in order to produce. Now, it's possible that you're still going to get innovation, right? You'll still get some innovation if I don't get profit. Right? You'll still get some innovation without profit, right? We invented the clock, right? Didn't have a market economy when the clock got invented. Another famous movie deals with an innovator, and that is Beauty and the Beast, right? The movie version of Beauty and the Beast. If you've seen it recently, you might remember. But in it, Beauty's father he invents what? This wood chopping machine, right? That's what and they all think he's crazy, right? The people in the village think that Beauty's father is crazy because that's what he does. He's just out there inventing this wood chopping machine. But so he's taken on this innovation, risk of the innovating or whatever, just because he likes to do it. Okay, so you'll get innovation, but if what I want is systematic innovation. To get systematic innovation, I got to have an incentive. I need an incentive beyond just the fact that you just like doing it, right? I mean, Beauty's father's incentive, he just likes inventing this thing, right? Or maybe he wants to get a prize wherever he's taken the invention to, the village, okay? But the incentive, if you want to have systematic innovation, the incentive's got to be there. And so when you think about where do we get innovation, you get innovation in market-based economies, right? Notice that the cell phone was not invented in North Korea, right? Or we're not going to say, oh my gosh, what's going to be the newest technology on social media, right? There's not a bunch of Cubans over there trying to figure it out, right? Why not? Because they don't have a market-based economy. And if you have a market-based economy, then what happens? Then you're going to earn economic profit if you innovate. And innovation then leads to you guys all being wealthier, right? And it's not that innovation just leads to a few people being wealthier, right? It's just not that Bill Gates got wealthy and none of the rest of us did, right? What happens is that everybody gets wealthier. As I maybe mentioned in here, you are wealthier than the King of England in 1263 AD. And it's not because you have more tapestries than he did, right? You have more stuff than he did, right? If you've, I don't know if you've ever seen this excellent film that's a documentary on the Middle Ages. It's called Monty Python's Holy Grail. But you'll notice, right, and that's set in 1263 AD, right, that, they are not wealthier, the wealthiest people in that thing aren't wealthier than you are, right? And so what is the, why is it that, in fact, you guys are wealthier than the wealthiest person in the world 100 years ago. I've talked about this a little bit. John D. Rockefeller was the wealthiest person in the world 100 years ago. You guys have way more stuff than John D. Rockefeller had. You have antibiotics, and you have telephone, you have not just talking motion pictures in color, right? you can stream things on Hulu or whatever, right? So you guys just are enormously wealthy compared to the wealthiest person in the world 100 years ago. Why is that? It's because of innovation, right? It's the innovation that's happening. Why is innovation happening? Innovation's happening because I can get economic profit, right? That's why I'm innovating. Now, notice that economic profit is a short-run phenomena, right? Profit is short-run. Why is that? Because other firms will enter, right? Other firms will start doing it. Just think about how many in here are using Windows 98 on their computer, right? What? Windows 98? Are you kidding? Right? No one uses Windows 98 anymore. Oh my gosh, that was 20-something years ago, right? Well, if we were talking about moving from before we got market capitalism, if we were talking about the difference between what stuff you had in 1310 and the stuff that you had in 1340, right? It wouldn't change. But today, you expect to have, oh, it's got to be the latest, right? I get stuff all the time, to add on to my computer, or, if there's some new malware device or something like that. I mean, it's always, box updates, like, I don't know, I get something on the computer, box updates like all the time, right? So there's always updates, all this changing. What does that tell you? It tells you that you have to keep innovating, right? If you're going to earn economic profit, you have to continue to innovate. Right? If your computers weren't innovative, if the computer that you buy today is looks the same as the computer of 10 years ago, right? That's just not going to happen. Why not? Because nobody will be buying that. I mean, nobody. You probably aren't out there buying 10-year-old computers right now. I'm going to guess no one here would say, oh yeah, I want to buy this computer that was built 10 years ago, right? It probably can't run the software and it's all this other stuff. That'd be a problem. Okay? So why is that happening? It's happening because of all this incentive to innovate that's going on. And that incentive is economic profit. And if you sort of think about it, what happens if we tax economic profit, right? You're going to cause problems with both of those things, right? You're going to cause problems with this market signal, and you're going to cause a reduction in the incentive to innovate. So for next time, what we'll do is we've basically finished the first readings in the Capitalist Manifesto. So over the weekend, take a look at Mises's liberalism. And maybe take a look at, certainly take a look at the introduction. And probably the first main thing we're going to be doing is looking at the section which is foundations of liberalism. And you'll notice on the old exams, I'm always going to ask you, give me 3 foundations or 4 foundations of liberalism and why Mises thinks there should be a foundation. So why don't you take a look at that over the weekend.